She could still hear them laughing. The voices were faint, muffled by the steady hum of hospital machines, but they were real. Someone poured a drink. Someone said, "It's over now." Then a woman's voice, sharp, almost relieved, whispered, "Finally she's gone." Her body was cold, motionless on the table. Her chest had stopped rising. To them, Rowena Clay was dead. But deep inside the stillness, her mind screamed, "I can hear you." The doctor's shoes squeaked against the tile, leaving the room. The door clicked shut. And in that silence, the sound of glass clinking in the next room became the cruelest lullaby she'd ever heard. They were celebrating her death. And they didn't know she could still feel every word. Before we begin, please like, subscribe and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa, United States, Canada, UK, Australia, Jamaica. Rowena Clay never fit the picture the Clays had in mind. They were an old family name in Hagerstown, quiet money, inherited confidence, and a long list of social expectations. Carter Clay, their only son, was the pride of their legacy. A well-dressed, well-spoken man with a clean image and a job at a financial firm downtown. Rowena wasn't from that world. She taught art at a middle school. Her life was messy, paint-stained fingers, laughter that carried too far, and dreams that didn't fit inside family photo frames. But Carter said he loved her for it. He said she made life real. For a while, that was enough. They lived in a small colonial-style home on the edge of town, surrounded by oaks that turned orange every fall. Their mornings were filled with coffee and her humming at the kitchen window. Even the neighbors said they looked happy. But behind that front door, the distance had begun to grow. It started with comments from his mother, Lorraine. "She's too emotional," she'd say. "She doesn't come from our kind of people." At first, Carter defended her. Then he stopped. Then he started staying late at work. Rowena knew something was wrong when his phone became part of his hand. When his eyes stopped meeting hers at dinner. When her name sounded like a burden instead of a comfort. Still she stayed. Because when you love someone, you tell yourself they'll remember why they chose you. When she found out she was pregnant, she thought it might save them. She believed a baby could heal what words couldn't. She didn't know that sometimes a child doesn't soften hearts, it just exposes them. The day she told Carter, he smiled the way people do when they're supposed to be happy. He hugged her, kissed her forehead, and said, "We'll make it work." But in that moment, she felt something hollow. The kind of emptiness that tells you someone's body is here, but their love left months ago. Lorraine was furious. She didn't even try to hide it. At a Sunday dinner, she pushed her plate away and said, "I warned you this would happen. She trapped you, Carter. That's what women like her do." Rowena excused herself and cried in the upstairs hallway, quietly, because she didn't want them to hear her break. That night, Carter didn't follow her. He stayed downstairs with his mother, talking in hushed tones. Later, when Rowena turned off the light, she saw his phone light up with a message. "You deserve better." The name was Renee, his assistant at the firm. From that night on, the air in the house changed. He became kind only when he felt guilty. And she learned how to smile like nothing was wrong. Months passed, and her pregnancy became her only source of joy. She painted the nursery herself, soft green walls, watercolor clouds, a mobile of little paper stars. Every brushstroke felt like a promise to the baby growing inside her. No matter what happens, you'll be loved. But her body grew weaker. The doctor warned her about stress, told her to rest more, stay calm. How could she? Every day was a quiet war, between pretending to be loved and trying not to fall apart. By the time her due date came close, Carter was barely home. Lorraine had planned a small family dinner without her. And Renee's perfume had started showing up on Carter's shirts. The night her contractions began, she was alone. Carter was out, a client dinner, he said. She sat in the dim nursery, breathing through the pain, clutching her belly, whispering to her unborn child. "Please, stay with me. I'll keep you safe." When the pain became unbearable, she called Carter's phone. No answer. She tried again, still nothing. She dialed 911 with shaking hands. The paramedics arrived to find her barely conscious, whispering the same words again and again. Please, don't let anything happen to my baby. At the hospital, they worked quickly. Carter finally arrived an hour later, with Renee standing behind him in the hallway, pretending to be worried. Lorraine followed soon after, her face painted with fake concern, already asking the nurse about what happens next. Inside the delivery room, Rowena fought for both their lives, hers and the child's. She thought of every time she'd been told she wasn't enough. She thought of her baby's first breath. And then, everything went dark. The monitor flatlined. A nurse shouted for the doctor. And in a sterile room filled with the smell of antiseptic and panic, Rowena Clay's heartbeat stopped. The doctor called the time. Carter looked at the clock. Lorraine pressed her hand to her chest and whispered, "It's over." And in that silence, one nurse swore she saw Rowena's fingers twitch. Some women spend their whole lives trying to earn love that was never meant for them. If this story already feels too familiar, stay. You need to hear what happened next. The hallway outside room 214 smelled faintly of coffee and bleach. The kind of smell that never quite leaves hospitals, sterile, tired, and indifferent. It had been 3 hours since the flatline. 3 hours since the doctor had looked up with damp eyes and said quietly, "We did everything we could." Lorraine Clay pressed a tissue to her lips. Her sobs were loud, almost theatrical, echoing through the waiting area. But underneath the sound of her sniffles was something colder, the faint curl of satisfaction. She turned to Carter and placed a hand on his arm. "You need to be strong now," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. This might be God's way of giving you another chance." Carter didn't respond. He sat stiffly, hands clasped between his knees, staring at the floor. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie half undone, his eyes hollow. But there wasn't the grief of a man who had just lost his wife, only the numb confusion of someone who didn't know how to fake the right emotions anymore. Across from him, Renee sat quietly in the corner, pretending she didn't belong there. She'd arrived after midnight, claiming she was just there for support. But she hadn't looked at Rowena's door once. Her gaze stayed on Carter, hungry for his attention, waiting for a signal that her patience had paid off. The nurse who had been with Rowena during delivery came out holding a clipboard. Her face was pale, her lips tight. She hesitated before speaking. "Mr. Clay," she said softly, "I'm very sorry for your loss. The baby didn't make it either." A sound escaped him, not quite a cry, not quite a breath. Lorraine reached for his hand. "You have to accept it, Carter. Both of them are gone." He nodded slowly. Renee lowered her eyes, but there was no tear, no tremble, only relief hidden behind the performance of sympathy. The nurse left, biting her tongue, holding back something she wanted to say. Something didn't sit right with her, but she knew better than to challenge the grief of people with influence. Hours passed. The hallway emptied. The doctor signed the paperwork, speaking in that detached, professional way that made death sound procedural. Lorraine insisted they handle arrangements immediately. "We should move on before things linger." It was nearly dawn when the celebration began. Quiet at first, like shame hiding behind politeness. They went to the small hospital lounge, where coffee and silence were supposed to live. But instead of silence, there was laughter. Renee poured champagne from the bag she had brought, just in case they needed comfort. Lorraine hesitated for show, then accepted a glass. "It's not wrong to find closure," she murmured, raising her drink. Renee smiled faintly. "To new beginnings." Carter said nothing. He didn't even drink. But he didn't walk away either. He just sat there, letting them fill the room with small talk, pretending not to hear the words that would haunt him later. "Maybe this is for the best," Lorraine said. She was fragile. This life wasn't for her. "She would have dragged him down," Renee added, her tone too casual for the hour. Lorraine nodded approvingly, as if confirming something divine. Carter deserves peace. Rowena never belonged in this family. Somewhere down the hall, a machine beeped. A nurse whispered something to another. But in the lounge, they didn't notice. The sound of celebration drowned out everything. In the sterile quiet of room 214, Rowena's hand twitched again. Her skin was pale, her pulse faint. But her body, the same one they had covered with a sheet, refused to surrender. A single monitor light blinked once, twice, then steadied. The nurse, Marla, who had been cleaning up instruments, froze. She leaned closer, disbelief spreading across her face. "Doctor?" she whispered, voice shaking. No one answered. The doctor had gone home an hour ago. She looked back at the monitor, then at Rowena's face. There, a twitch near her jaw. A flutter beneath her eyelids. Marla pressed the emergency button, shouting down the hall for assistance. 2 orderlies rushed in, eyes wide, stumbling over one another as the beeping grew louder. A heartbeat. A weak one. But real. In the waiting lounge, the noise of the machines didn't reach them. Lorraine was already making plans, how to announce things, how to control the story before it reached the neighbors. She even mentioned calling the funeral home her family had used for generations. Carter finally spoke, his voice rough, detached. "She didn't deserve this," he muttered, almost under his breath. Lorraine reached for him. "You can't torture yourself, Carter. It's not your fault she wasn't strong enough." Renee shifted closer, touching his shoulder gently. "Your life doesn't have to stop here." It was the first time he looked up, and something in his eyes, a flicker of guilt maybe, made Renee pause. But she didn't move her hand. The nurse burst into the room. Her voice trembled, breathless. "Mr. Clay." Lorraine turned sharply, irritated. "This is not the time." "She's breathing," the nurse blurted. Silence. Carter blinked. "What?" "Your wife, Rowena. She's alive." Renee dropped her glass. It shattered across the tile. Lorraine's hand froze midair, her face draining of color. "That's impossible," she whispered. The nurse's eyes flickered between them, catching a glimpse of something dark. Not joy, not relief, but panic. "She's very weak," she said. "She's stable for now. But, she's asking for you." No one moved. Not for a long time. Finally, Carter stood. His voice cracked when he spoke. "I'll see her." Lorraine grabbed his arm. "You can't. Not yet. You need to think about what this means." He shook her off gently, but she knew she'd already lost control of the moment. Renee stood frozen, staring at the floor, her mind spinning. Her voice broke when she whispered, "She wasn't supposed to live." Lorraine shot her a sharp look. "Then make sure she doesn't find out." The nurse's eyes widened, realizing what she'd just heard, the malice in those words. She stepped back slowly, memorizing their faces. In that hallway, under the harsh fluorescent lights, the mask of sympathy fell. And what was left was the truth, a family that felt cheated by a miracle. Outside, dawn broke over Hagerstown, soft pink clouds stretching over empty streets. Inside, behind a half-closed door, Rowena stirred. Her voice was faint, barely a whisper, but clear enough to be heard by the nurse at her bedside. "Where is my husband?" The nurse hesitated, her throat tightening. "He's coming," she lied softly. Because in that moment, they both knew the people she loved most were not praying for her recovery. And soon, Rowena Clay would learn that surviving was only the beginning. Rowena has survived, unaware of the celebration that took place after her death. But the nurse, now frightened by what she overheard, must decide whether to tell her the truth or protect her from the cruelty waiting outside that door. The first thing Rowena Clay felt was pain. Not sharp pain, just a deep, aching weight in her chest, like her body was waking before her heart was ready. The second thing she felt was cold. When her eyes fluttered open, the light stung. It was morning, or maybe afternoon, she couldn't tell. The walls around her were white, the machines beside her blinking softly, steady like lullabies. For a long moment, she didn't know where she was. Then it hit her. The beeping. The smell of disinfectant. The 4-line in her arm. The memory of voices. Her husband's mother. The clinking of glass. The word, gone. Rowena's breathing quickened. She tried to sit up, but her body fought her. Her hand shook as it reached for the call button. The door opened before she could press it. It was the nurse, the one who had shouted for help the night she came back. Her name tag read Marla. "Oh my God," Marla whispered, rushing to her side. "You're awake." Rowena's lips were dry. Her voice came out cracked. "My baby." Marla hesitated, just for a second. It was enough. Rowena's eyes searched hers, desperate, pleading. Please, she whispered. Tell me. Marla swallowed hard. The baby didn't make it, she said softly. I'm so sorry. Rowena's world blurred. The steady beeping of the monitor turned into a distant hum, and her chest felt like it had collapsed inward. Her child, the one she had promised to protect, was gone. She turned her face to the wall, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Marla reached for her hand, but Rowena didn't move. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Eventually, she whispered, "Where's my husband?" Marla froze. Carter hadn't been by once. Neither had his mother. They had left the hospital hours ago, told the doctor they needed to make arrangements. But how could she tell Rowena that? He's in the building, Marla lied. You need to rest. Rowena nodded faintly, closing her eyes again. But even in that darkness, her mind refused to sleep. She remembered the laughter. She remembered someone saying, "She's finally gone." And though she wanted to believe it was a dream, deep down, she knew it wasn't. Later that evening, Rowena woke to the sound of footsteps outside her room. Low voices. A familiar tone. She turned her head slightly, eyes half open. The curtain between her and the hallway was thin, and through the gap, she saw them. Carter, standing beside his mother and Renee. Lorraine's voice was soft but sharp, the way only certain women could manage. You need to stay calm. She's stable now, but it changes nothing. We handle this carefully or everything falls apart. Carter rubbed his forehead. I can't just pretend she's dead. You already mourned her, Lorraine snapped. Don't lose your nerve now. Renee leaned in, touching his arm like she had the right to. If she remembers what she heard, she'll never forgive you. You have to think about the bigger picture. Rowena's fingers curled weakly into the bedsheet. Her heart pounded in her throat. Every word burned like acid. They were talking about her, not as someone loved, but as a problem to be managed. Carter sighed, voice low. Just give me time to figure this out. Lorraine's tone softened. Of course, darling. You always do the right thing. They turned and walked down the hall, Renee close behind him. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Rowena's tears came quietly, not from shock, but from the confirmation of what her soul had already known. They weren't mourning her. They were relieved. Her marriage had been a play, and she'd been the only one who didn't know it was over. The nurse came in later to check her vitals. Rowena wiped her face quickly, pretending to be asleep. But Marla saw the tension, the redness around her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands. Mrs. Clay, she said gently, you need to rest. Your heart's been through a lot. Rowena whispered, not just my heart. Marla hesitated, pulling a chair closer. I don't know what you've been through, but you're stronger than you think. Not everyone gets a second chance. Rowena looked at her, really looked. Do you believe in second chances? Marla smiled softly. I believe in knowing when not to waste them on the wrong people. Rowena's lips trembled, but she nodded. That sentence would stay with her long after she left the hospital. 3 days passed before Carter returned. When he finally walked in, he carried flowers, the kind men buy when they're trying to look like they care. His smile was weak, his eyes carefully rehearsed. You scared me, he said. She watched him, her face calm, unreadable. Did I? He looked away. Of course, I didn't think. You didn't think I'd wake up, she said quietly. The pause between them was long enough to answer everything. Carter exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Rowena, You don't have to lie, she said softly. Not anymore. He blinked, stunned by the steadiness in her voice. What are you talking about? I heard you, she whispered. I heard your mother. I heard her say, she's finally gone. And I heard Renee's voice too. His jaw tightened. You were unconscious. Her eyes glistened. My body was. My heart wasn't. For a moment, guilt cracked through his mask. But then came the excuses, the kind practiced by people who know they've lost the moral high ground. You don't understand how hard this has been, he muttered. The pressure, the stress. She cut him off gently. And what about love, Carter? Where did that go? He didn't answer. When he left that night, she didn't cry. She just stared at the ceiling, hands resting over the small scar near her abdomen, whispering to herself, I survived. Not as a wife. Not as a victim. But as a woman who finally saw everyone's truth. That night, when Marla came in for her last round, she found Rowena writing something on a piece of paper. Are you sure you should be up? She asked. Rowena smiled faintly. I need to put down the things I'll never say out loud. Marla didn't ask what she meant. She just placed a cup of water by the bed and whispered, whatever you're planning, make sure it's for you, not for them. Rowena nodded. It will be. She folded the paper and slipped it under her pillow. Outside, the rain began to fall, slow and steady against the window pane, soft like forgiveness that would never come. If you've ever looked at someone and realized they loved the idea of you more than your soul, don't turn away from this story. Because what Rowena does next isn't revenge. It's freedom. Rowena has awakened not just from her coma, but from the illusion of love. She knows everything now, but she's not going to confront them in rage. She's going to walk away, silently, leaving behind a life that celebrated her death. The hospital corridors had grown quiet again. Rowena Clay could hear the faint squeak of wheels from the janitor's cart and the hum of the fluorescent lights above her. The chaos that surrounded her death had faded into calm, the kind of calm that comes only after everyone thinks the story is over. But hers wasn't. She had been given back her life, not as a gift, but as a test. 3 days after confronting Carter, she stopped expecting him to visit. The flowers on her bedside table had wilted. The get-well-soon card he left remained unopened. She knew it wasn't really from him. His mother's handwriting was too familiar. Rowena Clay had been busy. Word around the hospital was that she'd already arranged a small service to honor Rowena's memory. Marla told her in a whisper, half disgusted, half afraid. She planned a memorial, she said, eyes darting toward the door. Before they even knew if you'd wake up again. Rowena almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of it all had numbed her pain. Of course she did, she murmured. Marla frowned. What are you going to do? Rowena's answer came softly. Leave. It was the first time she'd said it out loud, and it sounded like truth. Not anger. Not revenge. Just release. That evening, when the nurse's shift ended, Rowena sat alone, tracing the outline of her 4-tube with her fingers. She thought about the life she'd built around other people's approval. About every time she'd swallowed words to keep peace. About every night she'd convinced herself that love was supposed to hurt this much. Her mind drifted back to her baby, to the little heartbeat she'd once heard through a stethoscope. She had promised protection. She had failed. But now, she realized something. Maybe protecting what was left of her, her sanity, her dignity, was the only way to keep that promise alive. She folded the note she'd written days ago and tucked it into her hospital bag. When morning came, she would leave quietly. Lorraine and Carter showed up the next day, unannounced. The nurse at the station called up to warn Rowena, but she didn't ask to hide. She wanted to see them one last time. They entered like they owned the room, Carter in his suit, trying too hard to look composed, and Lorraine in her pearls, carrying a fake smile and a bouquet of lilies. My goodness, Lorraine said, her voice bright. You look so much better. We were all praying for you. Rowena met her eyes and smiled faintly. You must have been praying very quietly. The older woman froze, her smile faltering. Excuse me? Rowena didn't repeat it. She didn't have to. Carter cleared his throat, setting the flowers on the side table. We've all been through a lot. Maybe it's time to move forward. Move forward, she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Is that what you call celebrating? He stiffened. I don't know what you think you heard. I don't think, she said calmly. I remember. Silence filled the room. Lorraine's face flushed with panic. You were under medication. You don't know what you're saying. Rowena tilted her head slightly. Then why do you sound so nervous? Carter stepped closer, his tone turning defensive. You're twisting things. She met his eyes with a steadiness that unsettled him. No, Carter. For once, I'm seeing them clearly. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his forehead. This isn't fair. Neither was my marriage, she said simply. Lorraine muttered something about ungrateful women, grabbed her purse, and stormed toward the door. Carter followed her, but before he left, Rowena said the words that froze him in place. I forgive you. He turned back, confused. What? I forgive you, she repeated, because hating you would mean I still care. He had no answer. He just left, quietly, because deep down, he knew the woman he'd broken was no longer his to fix. That night, Marla found Rowena sitting up in bed, fully dressed in her street clothes. You're really doing this, the nurse said softly. Rowena nodded. There's nothing left for me here. Marla looked at her with quiet admiration. Most people come back from death begging for what they lost. You're walking away from it. Rowena smiled weakly. Maybe that's what living actually means. Before sunrise, she signed her discharge papers against hospital advice. She left a small envelope on the nightstand, addressed to Carter. Inside, she placed her wedding ring and a short letter. I died once and the world kept spinning. This time, I'm choosing to stop spinning with it. I wish you peace, the kind that doesn't come from lies. Marla watched her step into a cab just as the sun began to rise over Hagerstown. The sky was soft and gold, the kind of morning that looked too gentle for the kind of truth it carried. 2 weeks later, Carter returned home to an empty mailbox and whispers from neighbors asking about his late wife. He didn't correct them. He didn't know where to start. Lorraine insisted on controlling the narrative, telling everyone Rowena had needed space, that she was recovering privately. But the truth gnawed at him in ways denial couldn't quiet. Renee was still in the picture, though things had changed. She wanted the life she'd been promised, but Carter was no longer the same man. He barely looked at her now. He'd started seeing Rowena in every quiet corner, every lull in conversation, every time someone mentioned love. One evening, he came home to find an envelope on the doorstep. No name, just his address written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a photograph. It showed a small art studio by the water, sunlight flooding through the windows. On the back, in Rowena's neat script, were the words, "Some things don't die. They just finally start living elsewhere." No return address. No explanation. Carter sat on the porch steps for a long time, the paper trembling in his hands. Lorraine watched from inside, her expression unreadable. She had spent months convincing herself she'd done the right thing. But every night, when the house was quiet, she heard Rowena's voice, calm, unbothered, saying, "You must have been praying very quietly." It echoed in her mind until sleep wouldn't come. And for the first time in years, Rowena Clay began to feel something unfamiliar. Regret. Meanwhile, in a small studio in Annapolis, Rowena stood before a blank canvas. Her hair was tied back, her sleeves rolled up, her hands still unsteady but determined. The sign outside read, "The Second Breath Studio, Art for Women Who Survived." She wasn't painting for him anymore. She was painting for every woman who'd ever been told her worth depended on being chosen. Her colors were bolder now, deep crimsons, burning golds, strokes that refused to fade. When she stepped back, her eyes filled with tears. She whispered to herself, "I'm still here." The past didn't vanish. It simply stopped owning her. Just as Rowena locks up her studio one evening, she notices a familiar figure across the street, Carter, standing under the streetlight, holding the photograph she sent. Their eyes meet. He doesn't cross the road. She doesn't wave. But for the first time, she feels no pain. 4 months, Rowena Clay lived quietly by the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland. Her new studio, The Second Breath, had become a haven for women who had survived their own versions of death. Not the kind that stops your heart, but the kind that breaks it slowly while you keep breathing. Every morning, she brewed her coffee, opened her windows to the sound of gulls and waves, and watched the sun climb over the water. There were still moments when memories slipped in. The hospital, the baby, the laughter that followed her supposed death. But pain no longer had a voice in her home. Instead, her days were filled with women who came with stories written on their faces. A nurse who left a controlling marriage. A mother rebuilding after loss. An artist who hadn't painted since her husband called her work a hobby. They painted together. They didn't need words. Every brushstroke was confession, healing, forgiveness. When local newspapers discovered the small studio, they wrote about it as if it had appeared out of thin air. A widow who found life in color again, the headline read. Rowena never corrected them. Some truths were better left misunderstood. Carter Clay, meanwhile, was living a life that looked perfect from the outside. He had kept his job, married Renee quietly, and moved into a sleek condo outside Baltimore. But peace doesn't come to people who build their comfort on betrayal. His mother, Lorraine, had grown quieter too. The gossip circles she once thrived in now avoided her. Some whispered that Rowena was still alive. Others said Lorraine had gone too far. Every rumor chipped away at the control she once prided herself on. At night, Carter would wake from dreams that felt too vivid to ignore, Rowena's face pale under hospital lights, her whisper echoing, "I can hear you." He'd wake drenched in sweat, Renee turning over beside him, annoyed by his restlessness. One evening, while cleaning out his office, he found the letter Rowena had left with her ring. He read it again, slower this time. "I died once and the world kept spinning. This time, I'm choosing to stop spinning with it." He read those words until they stopped sounding like anger and started sounding like freedom. And for the first time, he realized what he'd really lost, not just a wife, but a woman who had once seen good in him when no one else did. In Annapolis, Rowena's art exhibit was scheduled for the spring, a small collection titled The Breath Between Heartbeats. Every piece told fragments of her journey without ever naming it. One painting showed a woman submerged underwater, her eyes open, light breaking above her like salvation. Another showed two hands, one letting go, one reaching for sunlight. The local community embraced her. Women traveled from neighboring towns to meet her, sometimes just to sit in silence beside her canvas. She never asked for their stories. She simply listened when they spoke. Her life had finally found peace, not the loud kind, but the quiet peace that hums beneath honest living. But peace, sometimes, comes face to face with the past. It happened on a Thursday evening. She was locking up the studio after teaching a small group workshop when she noticed someone across the street. The same shadow she'd seen weeks before, motionless under the streetlight. Carter. He looked older. The confidence he used to wear like armor was gone. For a moment, he seemed unsure whether to approach. Rowena's heartbeat steadied, not from fear, but from clarity. He finally crossed the street, stopping a few feet away. "I didn't come to make excuses," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry." She studied his face. Not the man she married, but the one who buried her too soon. "You're sorry because you lost control," she said softly, "not because you lost me." He looked down, words failing him. "I dream about that day," he said after a long pause. "The machines, the doctor's voice. I thought I wanted peace. But when you stopped breathing, I realized what kind of man I'd become." Rowena's eyes softened, not out of sympathy, but out of recognition. "I used to dream of you saving me," she said. "Now I dream of water and silence. I guess we both got what we deserved." He nodded, defeated. "I know you don't owe me forgiveness." She shook her head. "I already forgave you. You were part of my lesson, not my ending." He stood there quietly for a few seconds, the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. When he finally turned to leave, Rowena called out gently, "Carter." He stopped. "Don't waste what's left of your life trying to fix a story that was never honest to begin with." He looked at her one last time and walked away. A week later, Rowena received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a birth announcement, no return address. It was from Renee and Carter, a daughter. On the back of the card, in Carter's handwriting, were 3 words. "We named her Grace." Rowena held it for a moment, then smiled faintly. Not out of bitterness, but acceptance. She placed the card in a drawer beside her paints and whispered, "Good. The world needs more Grace." Then she went back to her canvas. A new painting that showed a woman standing on the shore, waves lapping at her feet, the sky turning gold. She titled it, "Still Here." Months later, During a summer art fair, a journalist asked her what inspired her work. Rowena smiled thoughtfully and said, "Pain teaches you where not to return. But love, real love, teaches you where to stay." The interviewer leaned forward. "So you believe in love again?" She nodded. "Absolutely. I just stopped mistaking tolerance for love." The article went viral in Maryland, shared thousands of times by women who saw themselves in her words. Some called her brave. Some called her lucky. Rowena just called herself alive. That night, she closed the studio early and walked down to the dock behind her building. The moon shimmered on the bay, the breeze cool against her skin. For the first time, she whispered her baby's name out loud, the one she'd kept secret even from Carter. "Eli." She smiled through tears. "We're okay now." Somewhere out on the water, the reflection of the moon rippled, like a nod from the universe itself. And in that moment, Rowena Clay, the woman who was once buried by betrayal, finally buried her pain instead. Sometimes, the greatest justice isn't revenge, it's resurrection. To every woman who has been unloved in a house full of people, may you remember, walking away isn't weakness. It's how survival turns into freedom. And that's how Rowena Clay, the woman they thought was gone, rose from the ashes of betrayal and built a life that no one could take credit for but her. She didn't need revenge to prove her worth. She just needed peace. If this story touched something deep inside you, if you've ever given your heart to people who celebrated your pain, then you already understand what it means to start over. Sometimes, subscribing isn't about following another story. It's about standing with the people who refuse to stay broken. So stay, not for me, but for the truth that every woman like Rowena deserves to be heard.